Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow.
approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Hello, hello, hello. You're listening to a podcast not only of sound but also of mind. It's Time to Rewind is a podcast that takes a journey into a wondrous land of time loops whose boundaries are that of imagination. I'm your host, Bubbawheat, and each episode my guest and I explore these time loops one loop at a time. This stop is Trapped in the Twilight Zone, and this is the second stop at 2019's Season 1, Episode 3 replay, starting at 2 minutes and 59 seconds with Dorian asking Nina what does she know about Ryan Coogler anyway, and ending at 8 minutes and 16 seconds with Officer Lasky telling Nina to turn off the camcorder that's filming him. Once again, I'm joined by my wife, Kate. How are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good.
That's good. So let's go ahead and just get right into today's loop. So, it starts out with Nina experiencing a bit of deja vu. So, have you ever experienced deja vu?
Yeah, I think a couple of times in my life, to be honest.
Yeah, so this is basically the first repetition. So Nina is disoriented a bit and trying to figure out what's going on. And, we get the repetition with the Ryan Coogler line, and he no longer has the ketchup stain on his shirt. And he's just about to re-stain his shirt until Nina stops him. Shortly afterwards, we get the Jordan Peele narration. And I noticed that he is reading a newspaper, and you can barely make out the article on the newspaper. The paper is the Evening Chronicle, which is not any newspaper in the U.S. There is a newspaper in the U.K. that's called that, but nothing in the U.S. So I think that it's supposed to be just a fake newspaper. And the headline of the article says, "New experimental rocket ship crashes outside of Reno, Nevada." And I'm pretty sure that that's a reference to the classic Twilight Zone, "I shot an arrow into the air." And then, we get the opening credits, and then we get to them driving down the road for the first time, heading off to college. And we see this very fake snail.
Yeah, it looks pretty much like it was just put there.
Why do you think that they put, it's clearly CGI, so they had to have put it there intentionally. But what do you think that snail, represents in terms of the story? Why do you think that was important for them to show a close-up of a CGI snail?
Honestly, I have no idea. That actually escapes me. It makes no sense, as far as the show's concerned. And I'm just kind of sitting there baffled of why they would put a CGI snail to begin with, unless they just decided to do it just for the heck of it.
Yeah, I honestly don't really know either. I'm kind of curious, but it baffles me. And then, we get the 8-mile signpost, which again, I'm not entirely sure the significance at that.
I actually think 8 miles, maybe 8 miles to the uncle,
Yeah, and it could be, but
or 8 miles to the spot, 8 miles to the college.
I don't think it's 8 miles to the college. I think the college is farther away than that.
Oh, yeah.
But we do also find out, we have this conversation, this nice mother-son conversation back and forth between the two of them in the car. And I think this is nice to where we get to learn a little bit about them, and we get to see their relationship, how they have a very friendly, casual relationship to each other.
Yeah.
And we also get a line that's I believe is just about the only reference to Nina's job, where she talks about, or she reveals that she's a trial lawyer. She mentions that she wins all her cases in court, but loses them all with her son.
I think I think every mother can relate to that.
Yeah, and it's a very quick line and a brief line, and I do think that it does help set up the fact that that he is kind of a mother's boy, like a mama's boy, and even though she is, she seems to be very straightforward with him at times, but she also babies him at times and lets him win the argument whenever it's something not very serious.
Yeah.
And we also get the first reference to the estranged uncle, where where it's um, the GPS shows the turn, like tells them to turn, which would take them to Dorian's uncle's house, and Nina, that's one argument that she does win, and they don't actually go to the uncle's house just yet.
Yeah, I think like his facial expressions, and he is just pretty much upset with the situation. He was like, I grew up without him, and he kind of admitted a little bit that he was estranged. Um, and I felt kind of bad for him.
Yeah, it's um, we get to see. I think Nina feels like she's maybe better than the family that she left behind, but I think we get a bit more of that later on in the episode. And right now, it's pretty unclear as to why she doesn't want to go visit her brother.
Yeah, it's not really explained. Um, I know her son just kind of cracks a joke um, during the expense, just to kind of like break the ice with his mother because, she was upset that it was on the GPS in the first place.
Yeah, he mentioned that he programmed it before they left.
Yeah.
And we also in the background we pass, the GPS tells them to turn onto Emmett Avenue, and they pass the sign for Emmett Avenue and Earlysville, and there is an Earlysville, Virginia, which is not too far from Charlottesville. And I feel like all this is kind of potentially like a cluster of like racially charged references. We have it might be a little bit of a stretch, but I don't think it's too much of a stretch to think that Emmett Avenue could be a reference to Emmett Till, and that's a very famous case from the mid 50s of Emmett Till. He was a 14-year-old black boy that's, he, I guess, made some untoward comments to a white girl, and then he ended up getting lynched. And it took a long time for justice to really be served. And that's kind of a touch point in racial history. And on top of that, Earlysville is near Charlottesville, and that again was just recent years. It was a location where they had um, the demonstration with all the white racists with the torches and all that stuff. And then after that, he Dory mentions that he hasn't seen his uncle since Kaepernick took the Niners to the Super Bowl, and that was back in 2013. So that was 6 years earlier before this episode. So that was definitely a while.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that Nina has a line here where she tells Dorian that it took a lot for her to get out of there, and he needs to keep his head out of the past. And I think that's funny because throughout this episode, she's actually technically able to go into the past.
Yeah, she's
Like, it's
basically forced to because of, the situation with the racist coffins.
yeah, she doesn't always do it on purpose, but she does actually have the ability to go back into the past.
Yeah.
And we get to see a little bit more of the camcorder, and um, it's a Whipple brand camera, which I'm going to save that for the next episode. And on the side it says 10 à la propriétaire, which is French for 10 per owner. And that is another reference to a classic Twilight Zone, a most unusual camera. And again, I'm going to save that discussion for a later episode. But we get, our next introduction to Officer Lasky as the actual antagonist of the episode, because previously we've just seen him at this point order a chicken fried steak, and it'd be kind of a neutral character up until this point.
Yeah, I noticed like, with the rate with the waitress asking basically, do you want your usual order? And he kind of looking at her like, no, I prefer a chicken fried steak at this time.
Yeah, he's like, this feels like a chicken fried steak day.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like in the diner, he almost gives off like a friendly demeanor.
Yeah. Yeah.
But as we actually see him in this loop, as he comes up to the car, he's actually obscured in several different ways. At first we only see him through reflections, and then whenever we finally see his face, which is like I think maybe the third shot, is he's wearing these extra dark shades, which I just realized that it actually reminds me a bit of the sheriff in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?
Oh yeah.
Who has the dark glasses, and in that movie I'm pretty sure that he's supposed to represent the devil. And I have a theory here as well that I think Officer Lasky could potentially represent the devil.
Yeah, I can definitely see that reference. He is wow, he's something else.
Yeah, and he immediately goes into a bit of microaggression whenever Nina says that she's taken her son to college, and the officer immediately asks if it's the black school.
Yeah, and I like you just see her son's face and he's just quiet, but he's just like you just see him having this intense like intense facial expression like he wants to say something, but his mom like, keep it cool, keep it respectful, and he's just trying as best as he can to be, as nice as possible, but how can you be nice in a heated situation like that?
Yeah, and it's one of those situations, and I know we don't really have any experience with this, being being white, and we've only been pulled over a couple times for like minor traffic things, but we've never really had this type of interaction with a police officer. But like Dorian's body language, he is like you can kind of see the fear in his face and the tension, and he is very purposefully not moving. He has his hands both gripped on the steering wheel where he doesn't move, and he just answers the officer's question, even though he is very incredulous, like, come on, we're just going to college.
Yeah.
Whenever the next thing that the officer asks, if it's the black school, he asks if there's any weapons in the car.
Yeah, it makes me like, these situations happen to this day, and I have nephews, and they're mixed, but it's it scares me, after watching this show, it scares me to like, okay, is this still gonna go on? Like what would I do if like my nephews got pulled over in this manner?
Yeah.
Like it's terrifying.
Yeah, and I also noticed that the officer uses very specific language, and I think that he does this to make himself appear better than Nina and her son. That, like, he says, your mother conveyed that, and he says, are there weapons presently in this vehicle?
Right.
And he enunciates every word very clearly. It's almost like, he's making sure that they understand, and just like making sure that he's showing, yes, I am better than you. I know these big words, and maybe you don't.
Yeah. It's the type of person to where, I'm not as calm as Dorian. I'm the type of person, if somebody disrespects like me and my family like that, I would go off on them.
Yeah.
But the way that, Dorian just sits there and he tries to be as calm as possible, and then his mom, repeated again, like, she just said, no, we don't have any weapons.
Yeah, and he also, I'm pretty sure that he knows that he's got two things on them, because whenever he asks if Dorian knows why he got pulled over, he says that he was going too fast, and the officer's like, okay, since you admit it, I'll let that slide. Again, it's like him exercising his power over their situation. He's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to give this to you. I'm going to give you an inch, but then I'm going to pull you right back. And he goes after them for having a handheld device, which I think is interesting that he does go after the handheld device while driving, because that wasn't actually illegal until 2021 in the state of Virginia. So when this episode was released and when it was filmed, it would have been 2019, and it wasn't actually illegal at that point.
I didn't know when this episode was made. I just thought it was represented, like the olden days,
I mean,
or like back then.
no, it's definitely supposed to take place in the present, even though the camcorder is kind of retro, and Dorian even points out the fact that the camcorder, it's like an old school camcorder.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I like.
but I think at this point there was a push in a lot of other states to make driving with a handheld device. Typically, it's intended for cell phones, but it's I think the language is typically just a handheld device, and so he would be able to get them on using a camcorder, even though, like I said, it wasn't technically illegal in the state of Virginia at the point of this episode. And then just we get the moment with him at seeing the camcorder and asking if it's recording, and then freaking out. It's like trying to grab the camcorder. And
Yeah, he was basically going ballistic.
yeah, and that's actually really the first point in this episode where you see Officer Lasky as a villain, because up until that point, he's an obstacle, but he's not really a villain, because that's getting stopped by a cop is not that uncommon, especially if you are speeding.
Yeah.
And so because whenever they heard the siren, they weren't caught that off guard. They even mention it earlier in the scene that Nina points out that he was going too fast. So they were aware that they were technically breaking the law. And so whenever they hear the sirens, they're upset, but it's not that unexpected. And they think that they're just going to get a ticket. And that's how it looks like it was going. But like whenever he starts freaking out about being recorded, that's really whenever he starts turning the corner, and you see him as not just an obstacle, but potentially a villain, which he will clearly become later in the episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely intense. And the situation with this episode, I mean, it's definitely not one of my favorites. It's definitely like my lowest, but I feel like, this kind of situation happens all the time. Um with this racial crap, and I feel like this is a type of show that, you know, they have to be heard. Like, it has to be out there to where, people know about the situation and it can be handled. Because, I mean, there's so many cops like this nowadays.
Yeah.
It's just sad.
Yeah. And hopefully, uh, you know, as more media outlets and more people are shining a light on this problem, that more cops do face consequences for their actions,
Absolutely.
and so that way it does happen fewer times in the future, and hopefully eventually to where it won't happen at all.
I mean, it's 2022 now. I mean, come on, people. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like I said, I fear for my nephew's sake and for my nephew's safeties, but they're young, and hopefully, this stuff will get taken care of and called out, and they would have a safer future.
Yeah, and then, this is still a point where she is not actively pressing rewind, but she accidentally presses rewind in order to bring them back to uh, earlier, to bring them back in time and to end this loop.
Yeah, she doesn't really realize it.
Yeah, like she kind of gets the idea that something's happening, but she doesn't realize exactly what's happening until I think one more loop down the line. But that pretty much ends this loop. And I did want to talk just a little bit more about the classic episode that I referenced from the newspaper, the I Shot an Arrow into the Air, which that is a season 5 episode, I believe. And it is, it's a group of astronauts are firing this experimental rocket into space, and then they lose contact, and then it cuts to them crashed out on what they think is an asteroid, like a deserted asteroid, and several of the astronauts are dead. One of them is dying, and the three remaining astronauts are trying to figure out what they need to do to survive, because this is the only rocket capable of space travel, and it took them 4 years to build it. So they're like, okay, so we need to be able to survive on this asteroid for 4 years. um, and there's a lot of suspicion because they only have very limited amounts of water, and there is one astronaut that's very suspicious. Like, he doesn't want them to give the water to the astronaut that's gravely wounded and about to die. And then it just becomes this this paranoid play where we have this suspicious astronaut that, and basically, through the episode, he ends up killing the other astronauts, in order to take their water and survive longer. But it's just the way that it's drawn out, and with the suspense, and there's the question of whether or not he killed the second astronaut or not. And then they go up and find him, and he's not quite dead yet. And he has, the very cliched, like, the dying words where he's trying to tell them what happened, but he only is able to get like a couple cryptic words, and he draws like 3 lines in the sand, and they don't know what it means. And then the suspicious astronaut kills the commander and takes his water, and then he goes up above the mountain, and only to realize that they are on Earth, and they just crashed outside of Reno, Nevada, in the desert. And I I like the social commentary of the episode and the interaction between the three astronauts. The only thing that's really tough for me to get a handle on is how them being on Earth doesn't even seem like it's a part of the conversation. It's like they had just left Earth, but yet they think that they're on an asteroid. I think that is like the most ridiculous thing, that they don't even consider that they might have crashed back on Earth. But aside from that, I think it's a good episode. It's just hard for me to get over that logical leap that these astronauts just completely miss. But that does it for this episode. Kate, I'd like to thank you for talking with me.
Yeah. I hope that, this episode, helps people. And I know it's not a really good episode and it touches base on, some people. But, I hope this helps people. And, it would be nice if, this episode was out there more and like these situations are called out because, I would like to see a better future for everyone. During these circumstances and these people called out so it'll stop.
Yeah, yeah, me too. But that does it for this episode. So as always, I'm Bubbawheat, and you can find me at flightstitesandmovienights.com. You can find this show, It's Time to Rewind, on anchor.fm, as well as anywhere else that you listen to podcasts. And we also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. And, until next time, I will still be right here, trapped in the Twilight Zone.
I feel like I'm trapped in the Twilight Zone right now.
Submitted for your approval. Submitted for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your approval.
Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow. Another dimension.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow. Another dimension. Self.
Submitted
Light.
for your
Shadow. Another Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
Submitted for your approval.
The Twilight Zone.
We're just going to college.
Your mother conveyed that. I'm asking if there are any weapons presently in this vehicle.
No, sir.